I don't think it's going to mean anything. You want to go check the hub? Yeah, I thought I'd make sure.
You'll have to.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot. Live streaming on YouTube.
Good evening, everyone. We as a theater, I feel like maybe might not even have to use the microphone, but we have got all this great technology, and we're streaming live on YouTube. So just to make sure that the sound carries on, we'll use the microphone. Just like to welcome everyone to the Altadore combination meeting. My name is Jeff Patton. I'm the acting director for Area 6 for the Category of Education, which includes Altadore. If you were at the previous combination meeting, I was acting then as well, and continue to act today. I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for your feedback in the previous session and some alternative suggestions. We feel it's a great opportunity to bring people back together to talk about the feedback you've given us and talk about the next steps for Altadore School. We have quite a few people here from the CBD to support us in our conversation, questions, and discussion. So I just want to make a few introductions before we get started. We have Richard Hare, the trustee for Wards 11 and 13.
I'm 8 and 9 actually, Jeff.
Sorry, yes, Wards 8 and 9. Danny Breton, Superintendent of Facilities and Environmental Services. Carrie Edwards, down here, special guest, Director, Planning, Transportation, and Leasing, and Acting Director of Area 2. One.
Don't kick me anymore.
You can't edit live YouTube, can you? Karen Drummond, Manager, Community and Employee Engagement. Connor McGreech, Planning Analyst, Planning Department. Paul Flegel, Communications Advisor. Carla Anderson, Community Engagement Advisor. There. Kelly Christopher, of course, you know, Principal of Altadore School, and Karen Clark, the Assistant Principal of Altadore School. We'd also like to thank Central Memorial High School for hosting us and letting us use their fabulous facility. the girls who assisted you as you're coming in to register, Marista, Marina, Sasha, Nicole, thanks ladies. And our technical crew, they are part of the technical theater program here at Central. Todd, Sylvan, Gundars, Riley, and Maya. Thank you very much. I don't see them, but I guess that's how technical stuff works. It's in the background. But I heard it was YouTube and students being in charge. I thought, what could go wrong with that? I was going to tell my own children. There's some streaming live, but I also know there's Slido questions that are going to be appearing, and I didn't want my kids to have the opportunity to like type questions from home, like, can I borrow some money? And I have the keys in the car. So we'll just carry on. We really want to have an opportunity to share some of the feedback we received from you, present another alternative, and just continue to gather feedback so we can make a decision for how to address the accommodation student population challenge that exists at Altadore School. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over and we'll carry on. Thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Also, just before we move on, there's a couple additional people I'll just introduce. We also have Anne Trombley, who's the manager of planning, and Brenda Gibson, who's the manager of transportation with us here tonight. So in terms of agenda this evening, we initially came out in January, and some of you may have been part of that conversation, and some may not, to talk about some options that we could look at for Altadore School with the high enrollment. So some of this information was shared there and has also been shared since, but we'll be going over some of that tonight to ensure that everybody has that information. So talking about modular classrooms, as well as the questions that were raised around Dr. Oakley School as a potential site. And we'll be talking about scenario C primarily this evening, where we're really focusing on sharing that information because that's a new scenario that we hadn't shared in January. So I want to make sure that you have an understanding of what that might look like, as well as recapping the scenarios that came out of in January, the A and B scenarios. And we'll follow that up with next steps and an opportunity for you to ask questions and for our subject matter experts to provide those answers to you. Okay, we've got some formatting issues here, obviously, but that's okay. So in terms of how you can ask your questions this evening, so we have a couple of options. If you have a device with you, you can go to slido.com and you can put in the event code 083. It's also up on the wall there if at any point you want to reference that. So you can go in there and you can, I think some people have already put in questions there. If you see a question there that you have that's already there, you can give a thumbs up, and those that have the most votes will rise to the top. So in terms of sequence, we'll deal with those that the most people are interested in answers on first. The other option is to ask questions verbally here this evening, or to jot them down. I think people receive index cards. If you have questions, you can jot them down, and we'll have Carrie will be circulating and grabbing those cards from as we go through. So just a few things to keep in mind for our conversation this evening. We want to make sure that we have a respectful dialogue and that everybody feels comfortable sharing their thoughts and perspectives here this evening. And we just want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity to share those perspectives and that we balance the time. In terms of engagement and objectives around this, so this evening we're really trying to share information with you. We really want to gather input and feedback from families on the options that we could be looking at for Altadore School. We do have a framework that we follow for community engagement called Dialogue, so any of the engagements we do follow that framework. And we want to help you understand what the factors are that are influencing decision-making in this whole process. So tonight is really about making sure that you have that understanding and the information that you need as we move forward. Now I'm going to hand it over to Danny Brennan.
Thank you. So, over the next few slides, I'm just going to quickly cover how decisions are informed within the County Board of Education. So first and foremost, our values. Students come first, learning is our central purpose, public education serves the common good. That informs how we think, but of course that's not specific enough to get us into the details that we need to have. So that brings us then to planning principles, and those 7 planning principles are lenses through which we look at situations in schools across the city. And they're not necessarily a checklist. Sometimes you can't, in fact, hit all of those, depending on the circumstances. And depending on communities, maybe one is higher than another. And through these sessions, that helps inform what we understand to be the things that are important to the community and the school in question. Next slide, please. And so now this slide actually speaks not to just where we are in the process, but where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So Altadore School has been on our radar since, well, for a number of years. Several years ago, we started to limit the number of out-of-attendance area students, recognizing the fact that the projections were for this school to start getting to a point where it might be a little bit more challenging. The school is ultimately placed on what we call the 3-year school system accommodation plan. That plan is a plan of all schools experiencing fluctuations or issues, potential issues going forward. Some of them are just placed there for a monitor in case things start developing one way or another. Certainly Altadore School, we knew where that was started to head. And now I'm looking in, at enrollment projections for the school within its current configuration. We're seeing that enrollment is going to continue to increase over the next 3 school years. And so then that ultimately resulted in the development of some scenarios and engagement with yourselves on January 16th. That was the first session where we presented 2 scenarios. The first one was to overflow the students from Altadore School once we hit a certain maximum number, 50 students per grade, into another school, namely Richmond School. So that's what also sometimes people will refer to as the lottery process, because how those students are chosen is through a lottery process. At that time also we talked about another scenario, scenario B, that talked about a more permanent change in the sense of it was a boundary change. And so in that scenario, we were looking at shifting the school catchment area slightly so that a portion of what is currently now captured within Altadore School would be shifted over to, again, Richmond School, a school that has capacity. Subsequent to that, there was an online survey that was made available. And of course, both between the comments that were provided to us at that session, the January 16th session, and the online session or the online survey that was run from January 17th to January 27th, we realized we needed to do some more work. You spoke very clearly that you felt the process was too quick and that you were interested in exploring other alternatives. And so we went through those. We reopened some of the ideas that were brought forward. We'll be talking about some of those tonight here. And of course, also we produced a frequently asked questions document that was issued at the end of the month of February, on February 28th. And in the interim as well, on February 20th, I had the opportunity to go and speak with the school council that evening to speak specifically to modular classrooms, because that was certainly one of those areas, again, that had attracted a lot of attention on January 16th. And again, we'll be talking about that tonight. So now tonight, in addition to reviewing once more what scenarios A, the lottery process, scenario B, the boundary change, would look like. We want to talk about a third potential scenario, one that arose from your comments about saying, well, you know, maybe we can just ride it through. It's going to get a little squishy in the school, but maybe we can just ride it through. So scenario C is a status quo scenario, and unfortunately, Kelly's been able to work through what that might look like year over year based on the projections that we will be seeing over the next 3 years when things get especially tight. And then subsequent to tonight, well, of course, tonight you will also then be providing us with your feedback. And then subsequent tonight from Thursday, March 14th until April 4th, there will be another online survey, another opportunity for you to provide comments to us that will help inform the decision. And then ultimately, the decision we need to take, planning on taking that by the end of April. We've already shifted that date. Initially, we wanted to do it before the end of the registration, but again, because of the feedback that we received about how this process was going too rapidly, we recognized that February 13th was not realistic, and so we shifted that, and so that's to be able to give parents and the school a certain degree of certainty. We're looking to make that decision by April 30th so that it's not left hanging over everybody's head any longer. So, what else do I have here? I've already spoken to that piece, so I think we're good on that slide. If Carly, you could just move to the next one, sorry for that. And so that brings us to modular classrooms. And I'll approach this one from two angles. First from, let's say, a planning perspective, and secondly from more of a strictly facilities perspective, to just underscore some of the challenges with this. From a planning perspective, I think what's important to underscore is that the Calgary Board of Education is a public school board. It's funded obviously by public taxpayer dollars. And we have responsibility to ensure that we're sound stewards of the resources, the limited resources that are entrusted to us, and try to do that as much as possible in an equitable and transparent fashion. So given that imperative to responsibly steward our limited resources, and given the 124,000 students across the system that we need to tend to in terms of their learning needs as well, the installation of modular classrooms needs to happen in a way, again, that's very transparent. We have a process, it's available on our website as well, that has been informed by public engagement in 2014, approved by the Board of Trustees, and it lists a series of criteria. And one of those criteria has to do with the availability of space within the school that is in an adjacent community. And so amongst the many schools that we have within the Calgary Board of Education that are experiencing student accommodation pressures, such as Altadore School, at the end of the day, because of the fact that there is a school, again, Richmond School, that does have space, given the fact that it has 77% utilization rate, the space is available, it would not be something that would be considered under our criteria, because if we do add modular classrooms to Altadore School, then that would be removing resources from other schools that actually have higher, more pressing needs. And I think, for example, of Altadore School, that school is one that is at 100% utilization, does not have an adjacent school that has the capacity. That is one that ultimately ended up being submitted. And even there, in fact, though, we ended up being declined. But so ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, if we had modular classrooms lying around or made available to us, that's the school they would go to. We have a very clear process that sets out how we determine what schools need to be considered for modular classrooms. So that's the planning perspective side of it. From a facilities perspective, maybe I could just share some of the challenges, the additional challenges that modular classrooms pose in a Altadore context. So the Calgary Board of Education is funded on a per student allocation, not on a per meter squared or a per building or a per school perspective. So it's a per student allocation. But of course, as you can well imagine, the cost of operating facilities is driven primarily by the size and the number of facilities that we have, not by the number of people that are in it. Irrespective of the number of people that are in it, there's always going to be some baseline costs for operating those facilities. So adding a facility, as I mentioned previously, to a modular classroom to Altadore School would increase our recurring operating costs. Year-over-year operating costs would be increased by that. Additional factors, Alberta Education Minister has the authority for approving any capacity utilization changes to a school. Not utilization, I should say, capacity. Utilization is how much of that capacity you're using. So Alberta Education has the authority, and ultimately they also control the funding. The Calgary Board of Education is only funded for the operation and maintenance of schools, again on a per student allocation. And of course it's funded to operate those schools in terms of establishing the staffing within that school. In the Altadore context as well, the field just behind the school, so to the east of the school, is already well below today's standards for what Alberta Education establishes as an activity field requirement for students. So the standard from Alberta Education is for students to have a field of 6 acres in size. The Altadore school field is actually only 1.9 acres in size. The addition of modular classrooms would easily drop that down to 1.75 acres. So again, reduce opportunities for students to get the physical activity requirements that they have. Additionally, the field to the east of Altadore School is publicly rentable space. So because of the fact that public taxpayers pay for schools, there is an expectation that the public will have access to schools, both evenings, weekends, and in fact, we end up with more people going through our schools during evening and weekends than students actually going through our schools and on a yearly basis. So reducing the size of that field would actually impact one of the 2 ball diamonds that are back there, and both of the soccer fields. And so seeing as they're publicly rentable, that is all managed, all of the schools, both Calgary Catholic as well as Calgary Board of Education, rentals are managed through the City of Calgary. And so then there would be a discussion that would have to be had with the City of Calgary to ensure that they would be supportive and they would accept the fact that they would be losing that accessibility for the population. And then in addition to that, the addition of a modular classroom, even just one modular classroom, would probably end up triggering a requirement under the code to increase the number of washrooms that are required for that school. And so then that would require additional modular classroom in order to actually have a washroom facility. And then of course, all of the utilities that would need to be brought to that site. And again, that site is relatively old. Given the changes that we'll be proposing, it would probably trigger also the requirement to expand the parking lot, probably double the size of the parking lot, again, further encroaching upon the usable space around that school. It would also trigger the need to, so there's also waste bin enclosures that would have to be relocated elsewhere because they would be impeded upon as part of that work. So we would really reduce the size that's available for students. We have the challenge that we'd have to face with in terms of getting the proper approvals from the city and of course from the minister, and ultimately a lot of costs needing to be sunk into the school when, once more, space is available with an adjacent school. So that helps explain, I hope, the reasons behind the modular classroom, our perspective in not at pursuing that as an option. So I think then that brings us to the next area of significant discussion. That was Dr. Oakley's school, and so for that piece, I'll turn it over to Director.
One of the questions or feedback from our last engagement was, could we, us at Altadore Community, switch sites with Dr. Oakley's school? So let's tell you a little bit about Dr. Oakley. Such a wealth of schools in this neighborhood, from Central Memorial and the Performing and Visual Arts Academy, Career and Technology Center, and what used to be Lord Shaughnessy High School, Alternative High, which used to be Clinton Ford School, a small high school for about 125 students. Altadore School, of course, which you're familiar with, and Dr. Oakley School, which is also in the neighborhood. What you might not know about Dr. Oakley School is that it is the name of the school. It is also the name of a program. Dr. Oakley is a program for students with significant learning disabilities and significant gaps in literacy skills, most often associated with reading. Over the years that Dr. Oakley has operated as a program, we have learned lots about learning disabilities and how to address learning disabilities and the practices that help students succeed academically, socially, and emotionally with their learning disability. So students can stay at Dr. Oakley for up to 2 years, and the hope is they go back to the community school, carry on through junior high and high school, and graduate with a diploma. In that small population of students, students work in flexible groups and receive intensive and targeted instruction with the support of a lower teacher-student ratio and educational assistance support. Also supporting the students are strategists, specialists, psychologists, speech-language pathologists, speech-language assistants, and technologists who help students use technology to help overcome or adjust their learning disability. So the space of Dr. Oakley is utilized to facilitate the small flexible groupings and intensive small group and one-on-one instruction. Breakout spaces for this work has been created using the additional spaces available and some major and minor modifications that have happened at Dr. Oakley's school over the year. So although the space at Altadore School may look similar to the space of Dr. Oakley, it's not configured, Altadore School is not configured in a way that will support the programming necessary for Dr. Oakley students. It would require significant changes to the layout and significant changes to the program delivery without a basis in good educational needs and understanding for those students to move. Aside from the educational reasons why this is not a good option for the students at Dr. Oakley, although they are both CB schools, it's not a simple process of just looking at 2 groups of students and switching. It actually becomes 2 school closures and then a reopening or moving, which would require 2 simultaneous processes that follow the School Act and the closure of schools regulation. That process has to be completed within the school year it starts, and that's not possible to do in the school year. So that's the reason that Dr. Oakley is not an option, but we did explore it. So next, Kelly's going to talk to us about what maintaining the status quo would look like at Altadore School. So just continuing to accept all students who are in the current designated boundaries.
Thanks, Jeff. So I got to put on my thinking cap when the question came back from a number of you saying, what would it look like if we just kept everybody who was within our catchment area at Altadore School? It came through very clearly in the feedback that we want to keep everybody together. So what we've done is try to outline what that would look like at the school, so that if in this round of feedback, you could let us know if you think it's feasible or not. So It would make some changes to the teaching and learning spaces as the population went up. It's also, there is a limit to what we can do within the school. So if the population did go up more dramatically than what we expect, we may need to go back to scenario A or scenario B. Okay. So what we have here right now is how the school is currently used. So I want you to know that this is what things, as I go through the next few slides, what things could look like. It's not a promise or a guarantee of what it will look like. There's still a whole number of variables that could come into play that we don't know yet. We're still waiting provincial government announcements around funding the provincial budget this year. We would need to go through some approvals to do some renovations to make the spaces work as to what comes up. That being said, this sort of shows my best thinking with help from our staff about what things could look like if we were to be taking in between 50 and 65 students each year into kindergarten. And that might seem like it's quite a range, but that's because we have to group these students into classes of students. I joke around that it would be a lot easier to do things if I could just take a grade 2 student and put them into grade 5, because that's where the numbers are a little lower, but obviously that doesn't work. So up on this slide, you will see blue spaces are currently classroom spaces. There is a lighter blue right here. That's the kindergarten space. So I have made that space lighter color because that's when we have a morning class and a kindergarten class, so it's used a little bit different. So right now, we have about 390 students. Today it's 388. After the spring break, we expect it will be 392. It's gone up about 5 since September 30th. We have 3 classes at kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3, and 2 classes at grade 4, grade 5, and grade 6. And that reflects the fact of the growing community. We've just been bringing in more students in kindergarten over about the last 4 years than we have done previously, and that's with students within our catchment area. So over the last 4 years, what we've done is each year we have added a teaching space. Some of those years there were classrooms that weren't really being used. 2 years ago, we turned this space here, which was a double classroom, into a triple classroom. So there are 3 groups of students in that space along with 3 teachers, using it flexibly and breaking out into part of the learning commons here when they needed to have some extra space. Last year, we were able to do some renovations and retrofitting of this school, and this kindergarten space had previously been the staff room. So we created a new space that way. So if you think about it, those 3 classes that are currently in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 will be needing a new space. They will each be needing 3 spaces 3 years from now for grade 4, grade 5, grade 6. And that 50 to 65 number continues to show we would need 3 classrooms or 3 classes of each grade for that. So that's sort of how we came up with these spaces. Before moving on to the next slide, I also want to show a few of the spaces that are not classroom spaces, because this will become important going forward. So we have our learning commons space right here. Many of you might call it a library. We have our stage, and we have our music room. So where do we go from here? So if we go to the next slide, for 2019-2020, we would be looking at making some changes. So the main change for the next year would be to convert part of the learning commons that currently has this most stacks of books into a classroom. So that is, this part has now changed to blue. So when the school was originally built in 1952, they didn't have libraries in schools. They had like bookmobiles that went around. So that was a classroom which had been turned into a classroom. We could turn it back. It would look very much like most of the other classrooms in the school. Then we would take those stacks of books and we would move them over to the stage and turn the stage into a library. So as an educator, I couldn't call it a learning commons anymore. It would be a library. It would be basically a place where children could go to find books, switch out their books, do their book exchange, and then move on. There wouldn't be a lot of tables or spaces for classrooms to go and spend time doing research, those kinds of things, but it would make a space where students could go to access those resources. There would be some retrofitting of the space that would need to be done. So for example, we would be moving the bookshelves, installing some sort of wall or sound barrier in between the gym and that space, adding some whiteboards, code hooks, and storage to the new classroom. The part of the Learning Commons that currently has tables that we use would stay the same as a breakout space. So this is used all day long, most days, for all sorts of things. For some of our triple classroom or a double classroom, if they need a little bit more space, a teacher may take them or a group of students to work there. Our educational assistants work with students there. Many of our current parents will go there if they're volunteering during the day, working with students or setting up a fun lunch, those kinds of things. We would be maintaining that space for that year. Peter Pan Daycare, which currently offers before and after school care as well as kindergarten care, would continue to have access to the gym and the stage or the new library before and after school. They would not be able to continue offering care for kindergarten students during the half day that they are not in class. Before I change off of this slide, I would also say that regardless of which scenario we choose, A, B, or C, there is still going to need to be another space for grade 4 students for next year. Because even if we limit the number coming into kindergarten, they're sharing a space that doesn't mean it's a classroom space yet. So my best thinking at this point is this could be very well what things look like at Altadore School next year. Following year for 2020, 2021, we would look at taking what is currently the music room here and turning it into a classroom. So it also had previously been a classroom. It is a little smaller than most of our classrooms because when the internet came along and we needed some server closets, they chopped off a part of the classroom for that. And they also made a storage room, but it would still work for a classroom and would be able to easily handle a class of students. So there'd be minimal retrofitting to do. Assuming that we continue to have a music specialist, that specialist would then move from classroom to teach music. For those of you who know our program around music at Altadore School, that would be a significant change. And then for 2021, 2022, we're running out of spaces that are not blue, but we're going to this space right here. So that breakout space that we had maintained for as long as we could would also become a classroom. And in effect, the only space left really that's not used for washrooms or administration or the gym would be that space on the stage. So we would have to do a few renovations for that. We wouldn't be left with that breakout space for a double and triple classrooms to use, the guest speakers that come in, the artist in residencies, the garden lady who comes in and works with classes, all of that would have to be farmed out to classrooms. Staff would be eating their lunch in their classrooms because there would be, that's pretty much what the whole school would be at that point. Final consideration that doesn't really show on the map is that currently within our gym, students have gym 4 days a week in the gym and 1 day a week outside, because we can't fit all of the classes that we have into the gym 5 days a week. So as we increase potentially 3 more classes at a half an hour phys ed a day, that becomes more compacted as well. The students would be spending more time outside for phys ed, which is easy enough in the spring and the fall, but a little more challenging if you have a February like we just had. So that sort of gives you an idea of what things could look like if we decided to continue to accept everybody from within our boundaries. And I think that's my part of the presentation.
Thanks, Kelly. If we go to the next slide, we can see, Danny already talked about it briefly, but we can see the 3 scenarios, the 2 previously discussed at the last meeting, A and B, as well as scenario C that we discussed tonight. So scenario A, we have that is this is the open school, that's with the lottery. Again, students can join the school now, change with the school. Future enrollment will be capped. And we've been looking at capping that around 50 students a grade. So Kelly talked about having 3 classes moving through the school. We would have to scale that back to 2 classes coming into the school, so they continue on as 2 classes and not continuing to take up the additional class. For scenario B, okay. For scenario B, that's the boundary change. So we would be looking at designating the northwest portion of the Altadore school boundary to Richmond School. Again, current students at the school can finish until they're at 6. And new registrations from the redesignated northwest area would then go to Richmond School. Any students in the redesignated area would be in the walk zone of Richmond School. And then scenario C, the status quo, is what Kelly recapped, and we would the current boundary, and we would continue to accommodate all students as long as possible. So now I'm going to pass it off to Kate, and we're going to talk about next steps and making questions.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, so before we get into our question and answer, I just wanted to highlight some next steps. So tonight is really about providing you with information. It's not so much about gathering your feedback, but we'll be gathering your feedback on these scenarios through an online survey, which will be available starting March 14th, and open until April 4th. So we encourage all of you and any parents at Altadore School to share your thoughts and perspectives that way. The presentation from tonight will be posted by the 14th as well on the Altadore School website. And we will share the survey results when they're available by April 18th. And it's our intent to communicate a decision by April 3rd. So also just as a reminder, you all receive session evaluations, so if you can make sure before you leave tonight that you fill those out. And otherwise, I also wanted to, because she just arrived a few minutes late, we didn't have an opportunity before, introduce Julie Hurlippa, trustee for wards 11 and 13, who has joined us here tonight as well. So now we will open it up for questions. As I mentioned before, there are 3 different ways that we can take your questions, either using Slido, so we'll pull that up and go through those as they queue up, as well as asking them verbally or filling out your questions on the cards to go through. So it may just take a minute for it to come up on Slido. So I don't know if anybody has, we have Carrie who has a mic, if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask.
We're just gonna wait one about please, so just give us a minute. Here.
Thank you. I'm curious about the percentage of Richmond schools filled to now 77% filled.
Okay, the percentage that Richmond School, so kind of what the current enrollment is at Richmond School.
So my question for that then is, I was just wondering, what percentage, how many perhaps new families want to come in grade 1? If Richmond School is already at 77%, so that's roughly 25% to make it up to maximum, would then not Richmond School straight away be in the same position as Altadore? And you're saying you can't have prefabs at Altadore because of all the different reasons, but will then suddenly Richmond School be in the same position, and then there's still going to be more students in this big area that need a local school?
Okay, so, yes, enrollment in Richmond, could they end up being full or high enrollment, just like Altadore is right now?
Hi, I'll answer that. Pardon me if I don't stand, I've just got my binder in front of me. So Richmond School, this current 2018 school year, has 196 students enrolled in their school. They have a provincial capacity of 257 spaces. So that means there's roughly 60 spaces available for students to be overflowed or redesignated from the Altadore school boundary. So there are about 60 spaces, and the utilization rate does not, if you were to take that 196 students and divide it by the number of spaces, you won't get 77%. Utilization is a calculation that takes kindergartens at that time, and it takes high need students at a higher utilization rate. So overall number of students in the building is expected to be under the capacity of the provincial capacity of Richmond School with an overflow or a redesignation.
So I'm sorry, what does that mean? Sorry, it's me.
So the number of students in the school will continue to be under the provincial capacity of that school. Like the number of students.
For how long? I mean, just a little while then, and then in 2 years we'll be in the same position.
Well, as I mentioned, they have approximately 60 spaces in the school. We're not expecting 60 students to be overflow. We're expecting to redirect or overflow fewer than that to Richmond School.
Is there a way, can I ask, is it kosher to ask how many students now are on a wait list to come in? Like are there 20 students, 20 families, 15, 10 wanting to register?
For Altadore School?
Yes.
I'd have to pass it to Kelly, but right now there is no wait list because no decision has been made, so we don't know if we're going to have a lottery or if we're going to redesignate or if we're going to go status quo. So I'm not too sure how I could answer that.
So currently, we have 80 students who are registered for kindergarten. Of those 80 students, 22 are priority 1, if we were to have a lottery. 55 are priority 2, if we were to have a lottery. And 2 are priority 3. If we had, we would have 10 of those students who would be from the area that could be redesignated. That being said, we need to be very, very careful with that number. I wouldn't expect the number to stay at 80. So for example, I know that we have 17 students who are registered currently at William Reid School and at Altadore School. They won't all end up going to both. I know that we have a number of families who have children or a child who is born late in the school year, and they're actually kind of thinking that they want them to wait a year before starting kindergarten, but they're not sure. So they put their name in so that if there was a lottery, that would be happening. So there's a lot of those different kinds of situations where things have come up and we don't know what those numbers are. But that is what has currently registered at the school for kindergarten. There are also 10 students who have registered for grade 1. There is 1 student that's registered for grade 3 and 2 for grade 5. Thanks.
So I think we'll go to Slido now. Obviously, we've got a popular question here, and that is, why is there a preference to switch new students within the walk zone with existing students from outside the walk zone? I'll give us a little bit of background on that from our FAQ document that was posted to the school website. and then maybe have someone from planning address the why specifically. So regarding out of attendance area students, there was a period of time where the Altadore school population was much lower. So space and resources permitted accepting non-designated students. And a population of students that is too small does decrease programming options and school viability. Accepting non-designated students was a positive for Altadore School at that time. And as the population of community students increased, non-community students were no longer accepted, with some minor exceptions. And it takes several years for, as you know, a cohort of non-community students to finish at one school. So the CBE has a regulation, Administrative Regulation 6090, that outlines that schools may accept various students if they have the space and resources to do so. And that once a student has been accepted from an out-of-attendance area, they are able to remain at the school until the end of the school's current grade configuration, or until the program for which they have been accepted, until the end of the program for which they've been accepted. So although Altadore no longer, has the space and resources to accept out-of-attendance area students, students who had been accepted in prior years are still able to remain until they complete grade 6. So with that, maybe I'll hand it off to someone from planning to address maybe more philosophical around the why.
Yeah, so the reason why, as Paul mentioned, we have an administrative regulation. And in that it says that when a student is accepted as out of attendance area student, they then have an assurance that when they get accepted, they can stay there till the end of grade 6. So if the school has space and resources, they can take in that student, and then that family knows that they're not going to be asked to leave the school 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later. They have that assurance that once accepted, they're there until the end of the grade configuration of that school. So that's the why.
So we have another question back here, Karen, just before we move on.
Hi there, yeah. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. So the first one is, one of the planning priorities was not splitting up cohorts of children when schools are changed. Now, the community Altadore and Garrison Woods is a pretty tight-knit community. I think a lot of people who live there moved there for that reason. One of the other reasons was Altadore is a great school. I think everyone recognises that. But that cohort of students, that actually starts before kids go to school. So, when they're going to preschools or playgroups or daycares, they move into an area anticipating going to a certain school, they start hanging out with their neighbours, kids similar age in the immediate area. So your kids who are on the cusp of going to kindergarten at Altadore, they're already part of a cohort within that community. And my wife actually runs the community playgroup at Modular. There's kids in there who see each other every week. The families are friends, but this is more specific to the boundary change, but also the lottery. They've already become a cohort, and most of them are chalked down to go to Altadore school. So the decisions being looked at here, particularly A and B, that is going to rip that cohort up. Secondly, another planning rule principle is distance. The Garrison Woods, they're going to still within the wall zone, but they're going to have to go further. Okay, it's not ideal. The third point, and this is maybe more ironic, from my understanding, when the school was in trouble looking for numbers, it was the redevelopment of Garrison Woods that went a long way to boosting those numbers. And now the Garrison Woods crew are potentially going to be cut out. All the lottery is equally undesirable in my mind. But I wonder, final point, and then I'll shut up and sit down. I wonder, the timelines of this, it just seems rushed. I think the reason why there was such a big reaction in February is because the community felt they hadn't really been consulted about this at all. And then boom, February, scenario there will be, we're going to make a decision quite soon. For most people, it was the first time they'd really heard of it. another few weeks, and we appreciate further consultation, but, I think a lot of people think, well, is the Dr. Oakley Altadore switch, really not possible? And it sounded like one of the big drivers there was timelines, so it's not possible to do in this school year. Well, the decision's going to be made at the end of April for September. Like, that's not long down the line, and some families are going to be really affected by this. Can just say, well, let's just take another 12 months. It's tough at Altadore, but actually it's still working. It's still a great school. Let's look 18 months ahead. We've now started the engagement. Clearly, it's an emotive subject. The community is potentially going to be split up. Can we not just say, right, let's look another 12 months out and look at the other options, like the Dr. Oakley switch?
So I think there were a couple of questions in there. I think one, and it sort of ties into this question about why it's taken so long. So some of what you talked about in terms of us coming out in January, talking about scenarios, and the community feeling that it was too rushed to try to make a decision so quickly, that's why we've slowed things down a bit. So it's to respond to what we heard from all of you about it feeling too rushed. The Dr. Oakley option, I think we're not just saying it's not possible for next year, but it's not possible to swap the two sites because the Altadore site is not suitable for Dr. Oakley students. I don't know if there's anything more that we want to add.
I'll just reinforce again the comment I mentioned previously about how the County Board of Education is strictly funded for the operation, maintenance, the running of a school. We're not funded for major capital investments. For example, INU School is funded 100% by the province. The modulars are funded 100% by the province. Those are things that are outside of the funding that we receive. And so if we are making shifts of programs, if there's going to be a cost, that's one piece that we have to keep in mind. And then the other part is the fact that those students have the right to a suitable learning environment just as much as, of course, your students. And for us to be imposing upon them a shift that we don't know if they're going to want because they're in a good facility that meets their needs, that's in a process that's dependent upon the School Act requirement to go through that school closure for the purpose of relocation. At the same time as we're doing the same thing for Altadore, it's something that simply we're not considering. We did consider it. We reconsidered it when it was brought up on January 16th. But upon looking at all those factors, we just recognized the fact that it wasn't appropriate.
Great, thanks, Danny. So maybe we'll go back to Slido. So I think this question of why it's taken so long, you just spoke to. The next question is, can we simply transfer the children currently enrolled who are from outside the walk zone? Why is my child punished when we live in the walk zone? So just to sort of reiterate, there are a few scenarios that we're sharing with you as options. We're not saying choose one over another. These are possibilities of ways of addressing the situation. But I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Hi, so yeah, I would just reiterate what Karen is saying. So yes, there is one scenario that the lottery, which could involve some students within the walk zone going to another school. Scenario B does not involve any students going to a school that they're outside of the walk zone for. So any students redesignate to Richmond or maybe in the walk zone for Altadore, some are not, but they are all within the walk zone for Richmond. And then the third scenario is the status quo, which doesn't involve any changes to the designation area. So we have tried to consider what is possible for us and provide scenarios that they all have different opportunities and challenges depending on each family's individual circumstances. But we have tried to create scenarios and listen to the feedback in a way that we can say what things are possible.
I'm going to do one follow-up question here, and then I see 1, 2, 3, so I'm coming in order.
Yeah, sorry, just one follow-up to the Dr. Oakley one. It seems to me that, Altadore Garrison has been extremely successful regenerated area over the past few years. So two things. Well, what happens if the areas around Richmond see the same expansion in the next few years? Then suddenly that school is potentially going to be in the same situation, and are they just going to throw Garrison Woods back to Altadore? The second one is on the Dr. Oakley thing. It just doesn't quite sit right with me, and I know a lot of people, it sounds like that to me, Shell, because it's a hard option. But actually, the community of Altadore, Garrison Woods, and what it's turned into in the last 5 years is a great success, I think, for the city. And actually, why is that community now being punished for its great community spirit and cohesion by splitting, the kids in that community up? And, the hard option, which would be best for the community, being shelved for the easy option.
If I can start with the second question first. The hard option, you're talking about Dr. Oakley. Again, I go back to the fact that there are students, there's another community in that school. I have to respect them as well. The County Board of Education has to respect them. They're in a facility that's perfectly suited to their needs, and it's not costing us anything to keep them there. To relocate them would cost money, investment of resources, and it would still be subject to a process that I cannot guarantee the outcome because of the fact that it has to go through the school closure regulation. On the first question, is that more of a... Could you just repeat your first question?
Well, the first one was on your Richmond. Yes.
Yeah.
So probably not, the regeneration probably hasn't been at the level of Altadore, Garrison Woods, but there's a pretty good chance it will be the next area that kind of kicks out as Altadore Garrison Woods becomes saturated. So, it might, 30 years down the line, potentially going to be the same problem. What's going to happen there?
So what was shared at the last meetings and what you can see online from January, plus figures A and B, those projections for Richmond and the numbers we're talking about today makes an assumption that all the students would go. But in our experience, many of the students who are overflowed or who find they don't get accepted to their first choice make a second choice, and that might not be Richmond School. They might choose other options, and we see that in other schools where there's overflow. Sorry for that.
So said differently, are you saying that Richmond School is not forecasted to be overcapacity under any scenario?
No, so what I'm saying is that over time, as the students move into the school, yes, Richmond will have room over the next 5 years. That's as much as we can forecast out at this point based on the preschool census information we have right now, because anything beyond that, those children haven't been born yet. So we look at the preschool census information provided to us from the city of Calgary to make our projections into the future for kindergarten and grade 1.
Thanks, Connor. We're going to go to Slido, and then we have an audience question.
Yes. Okay, so the one question is what changed to create scenario C? For the CBE to identify a problem, discuss solutions, and then decide to do nothing. Some data must have changed. Please elaborate. I'm going to ask Chuck.
So in our original engagement, there were some questions about the number of families moving in.
There's a number of questions about the number of families moving into the Altadore community and whether the projection reflected economic downturn or current, reality or what people think is going to happen in the community. And so after listening to the feedback from the first engagement, some of the feedback was, why can't we just stay the same? Because one of the projections, or the projection from Connor's group shows the population increasing until the 2020 school year as the peak, and then it starts to decline again. So in 2021, according to our projection, that would be the peak population Altadore School, and then it would start to decline.
What if you're wrong?
We could be wrong, and so there is, Kelly shared a map of the school. You have all been in, or I think you've all been in the school, you know what the spaces look like. Kelly showed you really, no matter which scenario we choose for next year, that the map that Kelly showed for next year is probably the reality, right? One class in the Learning Commons, moving some books to the stage, and then we'll go from there. 100 kindergarten students register for the following year, we will have to have this conversation again. There isn't room for 100. There is room for 60, up to 65, right? There is room for that over time. If our projections are right, that'll be the peak. If our projections are wrong, then we have to come back and re-engage with the community. Like it is, you would know this, it's hard enough looking 2 years out, let alone 4 years out. So why are we re-engaging with the status quo? Because you asked us. Because you asked what was the.
Thanks, Jeff. We have a question here.
Hi, I think you might have started to answer this question already. I'm sorry. So with the scenarios you presented, Kelly, I guess my biggest concern is that if we go with scenario C, which is do nothing, or the boundary change, which does not cap any numbers in any grade, do you anticipate that we're still going to have to move forward with those changes in rearranging the school, losing the music program, if that is the peak year that you say 2021, that's still going to be what happens no matter what?
If we can't cap the number before.
I understand. Yes. Okay. So what I showed here was what we work over time with scenario C.
Yeah.
So we kind of see how that might play out. I think your question is what might it look like in the school if it was scenario A or scenario B?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So if it's scenario A, it's actually easier to predict because we're pretty sure that we would have 50 coming in at kindergarten. Our current kindergarten numbers are sitting at 53, and we know that a few students are leaving, so we're going to be dealing with smaller numbers. I would foresee that we have that first slide change where we have, as Jeff said, part of the Learning Commons become a classroom space for a year. But then as that group of 50 starts to move up, things will start to decline from there. The harder one to predict is if it's the relocation of the boundary change and we lose those students. So my guess is it would involve at least another year of time, but then how the numbers played out would be a little bit iffier. But my guess is that the redesignation would be closer to what I showed you here than to just 1 year.
But so for your, one of the highest groups of numbers of kids at the school is grade 1, with 66 kids right now. And you were saying that there's 10 new registrations for grade 1s coming in for September 2000.
But our kindergarten numbers are quite a bit lower. So our kindergarten numbers are at 53 this year. So one of the things that happened with our registrations this year was our kindergarten dipped, like for the current 18-19 school year. And I think some of that, what I'm gaining as the registrations are coming in, was fewer came in at kindergarten. There were a few more families that kept their children out in kindergarten, had other plans, and are coming in into grade 1. So it's kind of balancing it out. So our numbers overall are actually fairly consistent amongst grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 right now. They're all within about 3 or 4.
Go ahead, Karen, we'll do Slido and then come back.
Okay, well, so the question here, why can't the CBE just redraw the boundaries to optimize its school system, reallocate northwest portion or zone to Richmond? What's the formal mandate to consult? So I think that is one of the scenarios we've shared, is the potential to redesignate a portion of Garrison Woods to Richmond School. So that is one of the options that's out there for your consideration.
Yeah, so that's my question, I'll just ask it. What I'm struggling to understand is, why even stop at, because what I'm hearing is, even with that portion of Garrison Woods being moved, there could still be too many kids in Altadore, right? Because as Kelly was saying, there's still uncertainty over enrollment numbers. Like, why even stop there? Why not redraw the boundaries until everything works?
Okay, so have a bigger area that we'd be redesignating to Richmond School.
And going from that, I mean, why are we even all here? Like, why can't the CBE just optimize the school system? Like, why can't the parents?
Well, I mean, these decisions affect you, and so part of the dialogue framework, which guides us in our community engagement work, says that if you're making decisions that affect you, that you should have an opportunity to have a voice in those decisions. So there are different directions we could go, and we're really just seeking for your perspectives in what you think is the best direction to take. So that's why.
Hey, Karen here. Reviewing the capital plan for CBE, I was going year over year looking at the major modernization projects and capital priorities for CBE. Altadore was considered year one priority ranking as of 2014. In 2017, I assume when you started to have Altadore on the radar, then we dipped to priority third year instead of priority one. And now in 2019, we stand again where we're third on the priority list of capital priorities. I would ask if we've been on the list for, I guess, 11 years now, capital priorities, we were priority one. You see that the enrollment is getting higher and higher in Altadore. Why now we've dipped to a priority three when there was money allotted for us to have a major, it's called a major modernization capital project plan?
Good question then. So that is a wish list that we are required to submit to the government on a yearly basis. It has to be submitted by April 1st every year. And as a result, it's not a list of funded projects is what I'm underscoring, first and foremost. Secondly, the past 3 years, and commencing in 2014, was when the announcement started to come for new schools. We've been focused on building new schools in a city that's expanding and that had been expanding very rapidly. In fact, up until 2014 timeframe, lots of expansion, lots of growth, over 3,000 students being added to the County Board of Education every year. If you just try to put that into perspective, that is, it's probably something like 6 elementary schools or so.
I didn't pull the stats for the new schools. These were modernizations of already existing schools.
Right.
That's on a separate list for capital projects.
So the list is actually combined. So what we have to submit to Alberta Education is a combined list of new school and modernizations in a combined format. And so what I was trying to get at is that the growth of the city made the priority for the County Board of Education to be new schools. Because what parents tell us is that the younger students have more difficulty with long travel distance. So it's more important to get schools in new and developing communities, especially at the elementary school level. And so what has happened over the past many years is we've been building those 23 new schools that created the space for 17,000 students. And despite having built those 23 schools that created space for 17,000 students, system-wide across the city, we're still at an 85% utilization rate. So if we average out all of the spaces in schools and all of the students, we're still at 85%. So those schools were very much needed in those new and developing communities out in the extremities. And so how did that come about? It came about, unfortunately, at the detriment of modernization. So even though the bulk of our schools are older schools, in fact, over 50% of our schools are over 50 years old, we weren't able to set about and put those modernizations high enough on the list because we knew that new schools are more important because we had many more schools that were facing circumstances like Altadore School in terms of overcrowding essentially in the school. So that's how that has transpired. Actually, as of just today, the Board of Trustees were reviewing and approving the 2020-2023 three-year school capital plan, and then Trustee Julie Perlica was actually underscoring the fact that our list now actually has over 50% of modernizations listed, as opposed to the other way around. Previously, in fact, it was more than the other way around. Previously, we had over 80% of the projects listed were new school requirements and about 20% modernizations. So the modernizations are ultimately getting more traction now on our three-year school capital plan.
Thanks, Dan. So back to Slido. Why is the option of a lottery still on the table? It forces kids to schools outside the walk zone when otherwise all kids would be at a school in the walk zone. So I'm going to hand it over to Anne.
Thank you. So what I would say again is there are three different options on the table now of three different ways of dealing with the problem. So the lottery option, and I think we talked about this the first time at the first meeting for anybody who was here, is the most unknown about what would really happen. Who would get into the school? Where would they live? Which students would actually get in under the priority list? On the flip side, the lottery is the process, other than the status quo now, that would allow the most students to stay in the school, as well as have the most flexibility if the numbers don't come in as high as we want, or are expecting, I shouldn't say want, as high as some of the projections. So if you think back to the first meeting for anybody who was here, in the first year, if we used the lottery, we would actually really only be looking at overflowing based on the trends that have happened year over year, about 5 to 10 students in kindergarten, and the numbers are kind of coming in that way. If those students didn't all show up, then everybody would get into Altadore School and nobody would be redirected. Or if there are new students that move in some of the grades that had higher numbers, they would be new people moving into the community, have never been at Altadore School, and those would be the students that would be directed to Richmond. So the lottery is on the table because it isn't a way that we have managed overcapacity schools in the past, and it does allow the greatest flexibility to keep as many students as you can in the building if the trends change. Once you change a boundary, the boundary is changed, and then it becomes kind of an issue to change it back. So the boundary change is more known, but it is more permanent. So there's just two different ways in which we have the ability to deal with challenges where schools are over capacity. So that's why lottery is still on the table. So just again, to be clear to everybody, we are still, even though mostly tonight we focused the conversation on scenario C because it was new and it wasn't what we talked about in the January meeting, all three options are still under consideration. So for anybody who's not here, or people that you know that are listening online, or anybody, please fill out the survey because that survey again will have questions about all three options, and we really need to understand what people are thinking about the three different options.
Thanks, Anne. We're going to go to a question. I have a couple of questions. The first one is, how does the survey work? So is this like a democratic vote, that whoever votes the most on the surveys, their option gets chosen, or does that just inform the group's decision? The second question was about, I would really love to hear Kelly and the school administration's opinion on how they think the option C would affect the learning for the kids in the school. Because that's one of my big concerns. And then the third one, which I think has already been answered, I just wanted to clarify that if we did the redraw of the boundary, there would be no cap. All of those students in the newly drawn boundary would come in, even if that was 80 kids, which I hear you that it probably wouldn't be, but that would be maybe a risk of that.
Okay, so the first one on the survey, it's not a vote. But it's a way for us to gather perspectives from you on the three different options that we're looking at, and then to use that to inform the decision. Yeah, we're trying to understand what's most important to you through that survey so that our decision makers have the information that they need to make the best decision for this school community. The next question was on.
Impact on learning for the school.
Impact on learning, so.
Feels like a trick question.
It's not a trick question, like I legitimately am not
Yeah.
a teacher.
No, I would say that as a staff, we feel that we are currently at the range of where we can offer things exactly the way that we would like to. So losing our learning commons space and the flexibility of that to go onto the stage, that's not an ideal learning space. That's why we chose it for, not for a classroom and for a learning commons. Do we feel that? Yes. Do we feel losing having a music room at Altadore School? Absolutely. Do we feel losing a breakout space that's allowing us flexibility with our double and our triple classes especially? Yes, we feel it. All of that being said, I wouldn't want anybody to leave thinking that we didn't feel like we could offer a quality program. It would be harder for the staff. It would be squishier. It would require much more flexibility from everybody. We would still be able to offer a good program. And then your third question, just since I was here, was around if the boundaries changed, we would take everybody within the new boundary.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, so Slido, any chance of a decision before April 30th? That's 2.5 months after the initial decision was supposed to be made. Time to plan childcare is ticking away. Yes, we recognize this has an impact on families in terms of planning for the school year. To provide adequate time to gather feedback through the survey, given that we have spring break in there, we are still looking at April. If we can do it earlier in April than the 30th, we will. If we have clear direction from the survey and we're able to communicate sooner, we definitely will, but it's going to be April. We can't do it any earlier than that.
One more from here.
So first of all, thank you to the Altadore staff for making sacrifices for our children, like giving up your staff room. I appreciate that. I know there are parents who appreciate that too, the benefit of our children. My question is actually about Richmond School. I know nothing about Richmond School, so I've kind of a two-part question. One, what do Richmond schools think about options or scenarios A and B? And two, have parents come forward with any concerns about Richmond School as compared to Altadore to send their children to? So what I'm hearing is that there's a sense of wanting to keep the community together, which is one of the reasons that I live in this community. In terms of the school itself, Altadore is a great school. What's Richmond like?
So the first part of the question was. So Richmond School currently has quite a bit of space. As an elementary school principal, as more students come into your school, you can start to offer different things. So to a point, right up to the point of having to go way over capacity. So as their population increases, they would hire more teachers with different skills, which can increase the number of clubs that are offered, the number of teachers who do supervision, kids can play in different places. So Richmond School is interested in having more students and ready to welcome students from wherever the CBE designates from. Richmond School is a K-6 school. Represents communities just like any other community in Calgary, a wide range of kindergarten to grade 6 that represents the diversity that Calgary has. So there's offers a good program. We don't compare Altadore School to Richmond School to any other elementary school. It is it's a K-6 school with qualified staff. qualified principal and ready to welcome students entering this year.
A very diplomatic answer, thank you. But my question is about what parents have come forward with their concern. I know that you're unable to compare schools in line, should you? Is there any undercurrent of anything that I haven't heard of, or other parents haven't heard of? As I say, I know nothing about Richmond Street.
I have had some conversations with the principal at Richmond School, so your first question I can answer very easily for you. They would welcome any new students with open arms from the administration, the staff, and the parents who are at that school. So that's a very easy answer to give you. I haven't had a lot of people come to me to ask for comparisons between the schools. They're different school communities. And my understanding is, and to me what's most important, is that the parents that go to that school love that school. And they would love to be able to speak to people who would be coming.
Okay, to slide out, can you explain how the final decision is made by vote by whom? So in terms of by whom, our two decision makers on this are Carrie Edwards and Jeff Hutton. So that's who will be making the decision. It isn't a vote. What we will be considering, so the CBE values, the planning principles which we shared with you, those will guide decision-making along with the input and the feedback that we gather from all of you in terms of the opportunities and challenges and considerations that you identify for us. If you want to add anything.
Audience?
First, I just want to thank the Altadore School for utilizing the space more efficiently to accommodate the students or the overflow of the students. I think it's a good temporary solution, but I really would like to add a little bit or pick up where my colleague left here about some of the concerns of having the kids or the friends moving to another school outside our boundaries. I actually own two development companies, building companies, and we've been building in Altadore for the last 10 years. And we probably did more than 25 homes, and we changed the housing structure from the old bungalows to high-end $800,000 average homes. And I think everybody probably want to hear this, and which is down to the core of the problem. When people come and buy houses from us and they expect to pay $800,000 to $2 million houses, they expect services, and we do sell them those houses based on the community, based on the schooling in Altadore, based on the parks around us, based on the facilities. And unfortunately, I have so much information tonight, but I did not hear one core solution. I did not hear a fundamental solution. Also, I want to correct some of the information that everybody was talking about the capacity. For your information, the city of Calgary is always rezoning and pushing inner city living. And if you think that there will be less capacity the coming 3 years, I'll tell you it's not going to happen, because if you notice, things has been rezoned on 16th Street, for example, on 14th Street, on 9th Street, to townhouses, to multi-unit functions, and that's going to increase the density of people, which is going to have more families. And Altadore is bringing more families in. Our developments is bringing more families in that maybe they don't have kids today, but they're going to have kids in 5 years. My son is 5 years old. And my question to you would be, what would be if today the temporary solution is using the efficient Altadore school, the efficiency of the Altadore school, what do you think the future solution will be? Because you're not going to have less capacity.
Okay,
So I'll give that one a start, and I don't know, maybe there might be some more information to add. First of all, let me just reiterate that the County Board of Education is in constant communication with the city so that we see what is foreseen in terms of city densification. Another component is the fact of how communities are built, how they were built and how they are built today. So what we typically work with in terms of numbers of citizens in a community nowadays in order to be able to have a viable elementary school is 10,000 citizens for one elementary school. Now, way back in the day, that was not the case because the fact that people were having 4 or more children per family. Today, we're about the 1.5 child per family. And what we're seeing in terms of city census data is that even though the city continues to grow, the number of preschool census children that are identified as part of the census, I should say, is actually going down. We're seeing fewer numbers of kindergarten students enter schools. And then because of how communities used to be built, and going back to the fact that it used to be, families with much larger numbers of children, within the sort of inner city portion of the city, we actually have a really high density of schools, of elementary schools. And I think we're looking actually at, 51% by residents, a 51%, what's the term I'm looking for? Enrollment, so 51% enrollment within the inner city. So if it wasn't for actual movement of students from out in the suburbs into more of the inner city, many of these schools, most of these schools would be emptier if it was equally spread. They would all be approximately 50% full. So I don't know if I properly explained myself, but again, the schools within the inner city, if they were only going to be filled by students who came from that area, would only be filled to 50%. And so we know that we have more than enough capacity over time to be able to adjust to any sort of city densification that may be occurring.
I know, but we're talking about the Altadore school here. We're not talking about the Beltline schools. Where, yes, you're right about the less kids or more schools than what we need. We're talking about one community, Altadore. Shouldn't we be targeting Altadore, not everything else around us?
I think his question is, what is the long-term plan? We're hearing a short-term plan, but I don't think anybody here has a sense that there's something to address this beyond 2 or 3 years because the problems are going to get bigger.
So I just maybe to then paraphrase some of the comments from Anne previously. I think the long-term solution here is scenario B, that would see a boundary change. That is a more permanent long-term solution. Whereas a scenario A is one that gives more flexibility. It's only used if and when required, and then if and when the population actually comes back down, we can stop using that mechanism. That's the lottery solution. And then scenario C is also more of a temporary waiting out the surge in students, and then when things start dropping back off, the pressure is ultimately released on the school.
Okay. I might have a little bit different perspective on this from other people who are up on the stage. But I've been in Altadore for a couple of years now and worked at William Reed before that. So I hear from you guys on a daily basis about the issues that are happening around densification in Altadore and around this area. And coming from a school perspective, it is something that we worry about. It's also something that they know about downtown. The problem is, there's not an easy answer to it all. The easiest answer to it all would be, let's build another school. The result of that, though, is we don't have the funding. And I don't see the funding coming anytime soon. So, trustees, if I'm stepping on your toes, let me know afterwards. But please not right now when I'm on the stage. But there isn't an easy answer to those long-term solutions. And just as we got more and more crowded and the decisions around accommodations got more and more difficult before we built those 12 or 14 or however many schools it was, they got more challenging until there was a bump in the new schools that were announced by the government. And that's what we have to live with. We have to make decisions in the meantime.
Kelly, I would add also that even if we had the money to build the new schools, we might not have the land to do it.
Great. On Slido, our question is, why punish existing students by removing the stage, music room, etc., when Richmond is nearby with capacity and can easily handle nearby students from Garrison Woods? So I would say initially the feeling was, yeah, we didn't want to make the school too full, which is why we came up with scenarios A and B. But based on some of the comments and feedback we were hearing, that people wanted to see what status quo would look like, we were able to explore it further and wanted to provide that as an option. So again, there's multiple scenarios that we're putting forward to you, and it's really based on your feedback that will help to guide decisions that we make.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, so this is a question more directed at folks up there. So as a parent of students who are in Altadore, I'm concerned about the school being at capacity, being over capacity. I'm also concerned about that bubble that we're talking about moving up through the schools. And the thing that I haven't heard here is what's our plan for junior high? What's the plan for high school? When I get a link sent to another survey for the next school up that my kids are supposed to go to that says, please give us your feedback on changing walk zones, I get concerned. So what's your plan for moving those same kids up through all these other schools? Thank you.
So I think that may have been addressed in our FAQ, and so Paul's going to share that information with us.
Oh. All right, so an earlier question we received from the previous meeting, very similar. Will we be facing a similar capacity issue of Mount Royal School as this population of students moves into junior high? So Altadore and Richmond schools both feed into Mount Royal School. Mount Royal is grade 7 to 9 with an enrollment of 271 as of September 30th, 2018, with a capacity of 435. The utilization rate as of September 30th last year was 73%. So current enrollment projections indicate the school will have space to accommodate the students from their home area into the future. Historically, 35 to 45% of designated students choose to attend Mount Royal School. The balance, 55 to 65% of designated students make other choices for grade 7. So this has been an observed trend for the past 10 years at Mount Royal, and any change in enrollment patterns would be monitored and addressed. But given the size of the school, a change in grade configuration would not be an option, as there would be insufficient space to accommodate, say, a grade 5 to 9 or a grade 6 to 9 at Mount Royal.
So why are they changing the walk zone from Mount Royal?
So now, so the Mount Royal walk zone was a small adjustment made when we introduced the Calgary Transit rebate. Any area outside of 2.4 kilometers from the school was eligible for the rebate. And so when we did the calculation of 2.4 kilometers, there was a small section that was actually fell inside the walk zone. And so what we did was we just adjusted the walk zone so no part that's over 2.4 kilometers falls within it. That was the only adjustment made. And it was just simply, it's confusing for parents for me to say you're inside the walk zone, but you're eligible for the rebate. So it was just to clean up those lines. That was the only change made.
Thanks, Brenda. Okay, back to Slido. Why isn't Elbow Park School part of this discussion? We just spent millions to build it seemingly with no foresight on capacity in adjacent neighborhoods.
Okay, so 2013 floods happened, Elbow Park is severely impacted. And the answer to that question, to be really blunt, it was a political decision. It was not a Calgary Board of Education planned out rebuild. It was a political decision that that school would be rebuilt. So that's really all I can offer.
Okay, Karen, we have a question from the audience.
Sorry, yeah.
All right, so my understanding, so I wasn't here in 2013, but that was the Premier's writing. And the decision was made by the government at that time that that school will be rebuilt. So I do not have any other visibility on this, but it was not something that we planned within the Calgary Board of Education.
So is that school not
Maybe
capacity?
sending the kids there as opposed to Richmond, or possibly doing some rezoning in that area to maybe take some of that.
Right. So then if you're talking about proximity then, I would expect that the distance is actually further. And so when you look back at our planning principles, so if you just go back to the planning principles, one of them is trying to keep students as close as possible to their school. And the distance from the area that's been drawn out is under scenario B, from, let's say, the center of that area, I believe we chose sort of the traffic circle that's in that area, to Richmond School is 1.5 kilometers. And so the distance there is less, and ultimately that's where Richmond School then ends up being part of the discussion as opposed to Elbow Park. Would there be anything else? Do we have a distance to?
Just if there's more students closer to Richmond School.
So those students are the ones that are going to be sent to Richmond School and not the ones that live within 50 yards of Altadore School then? Because when you go to the lottery, that's the option. You've got kids who live less than 750 metres from Richmond School, who in a lottery scenario would potentially come to Altadore, and others who live within 50 yards of Altadore School, potentially then having to travel 2.5 kilometres to Richmond School.
That's correct, and so that's where I was talking about the planning principles not always being essentially possible to enact or meet in every possible scenario. So under scenario A, the lottery scenario, you could have somebody living across the road from Altadore being told that they're having to attend Richmond School, and somebody who's at the other extremity of the community being the winner of that lottery and being allowed to attend Altadore School.
Okay, so we have a question from the
Can we
audience.
just, sorry, we're having a conversation. Can we not finish the conversation?
I think people have been waiting for the question, so if you have a question, you raise your hand, I'll be happy to come and get to it.
We're in the process of the question. We're having a to and forth conversation.
Okay, so this gentleman's been waiting 5 minutes to ask this question.
I have a feeling the Elwood Park conversation got a bit closer.
Go ahead.
That's okay.
If you want to finish
No, you carry on.
Okay, so I apologize if this has been dealt with before. This is my first meeting. And I see that you offered us 3 options. Is that all? I mean, I apologize. I'm sure there's a lot of background that's gone into this, but it seems that you've given us, a lottery option, redrawing the zones option, or utilizing the current school option. Again, why, if there's obviously this much concern about the 3 options, and we've been going through these meetings and you're going through these feedbacks, why not take another, and again, I think the question is, why not take some more time and look at some other options? Surely Altadore is not the first community to be dealing with this issue. I'm sure that there's other creative solutions that have been found that are, reasonable as opposed to what's been presented. Because again, I'll be honest, I apologize if this comes across as blunt, but none of the options particularly seem as overly great for someone moving in Altadore. And I think that's why there's so much concern in going forward on this.
Okay, I'll start, and then if anybody else wants to add. So I can tell you we've had multiple conversations about potential scenarios for Altadore School. And really, we came out in January with a couple scenarios that we felt we could make work, given our available space and resources. After the feedback that we gathered in January, we did take more time, and we have been taking time since that, to talk through what other scenarios, are there other scenarios we could look at? And really the status quo option was the only other option that we saw as feasible for us, given the available space that we have in our schools, the resources, and all of the considerations.
I'm sorry, but the status quo option doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. You're telling me that to bring modular schools in, you're going to have to increase capacity of bathrooms. You're going to have to shift around the house. So how does that change if also you bring a whole bunch of students and we lose a music room, we lose a stage, and we lose what? So if there's a set number of students per bathroom, students per facility, how does that not exclude, how does that not bump us into problems then?
So the modular option is not an option.
I'm not asking about that, I'm saying, if you're saying the modular option isn't an option because the facilities can't support, the school facilities can't support modular schools, how is increasing the number of students in the school going to avoid that? Aren't you still going to run into the same problems, or are we going to have lineups waiting for the potty?
So what we feel, with the two scenarios that were presented originally, were based on not having to have any students who are currently in Altadore school have to move schools. It is possible, and it's happened in other accommodation meetings, when a boundary is redrawn or a community is redesignated, students who are currently in school need to move to their new designated school. We didn't share that option with you. We didn't consider it for very long. When I started with it, it wasn't even a consideration. So one of our first filters was keeping all students who are currently enrolled in Altadore school, but in the finished Altadore school. So that was the first. The second was looking at the projections from Connor's group. It does show after 2021 that would be the peak population for Altadore school, and then it would start to decline.
I think you're mistaken on that, because
I don't know, but you don't know either.
No, I
right?
don't know, because look at the plan in City Hall.
You're right.
Look at the rezoning of the inner city belt, including Altadore, and you see more capacity, and we're doing that. We're building this more capacity.
Have some respect, and I'm speaking. No, for sure.
With all respect.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to catch you.
Oh, sorry.
And so, if we were to go with the status quo scenario, and accommodate all the students who want to attend Altadore school, live in the boundaries of Altadore school, Kelly had said, with some changes to the school, we can accommodate all of those students. When kindergarten registration starts again in January 2020, we'll know, right? We will have an idea of what's next, and then we can have this conversation again if we have to. So if the projections are right, when we say we're expecting 50, 55, 60 kindergarten students, and that's the number of registrations we get, then we know what the go-forward plan is in Altadore school. Having a school lose its library and its music room and all of its breakout spaces, that might not be the best option to the people who are in Altadore school right now. But it might be the option that most parents in Altadore school currently support. We won't know until we start receiving your feedback. I'm hearing some now, right? We are all hearing some of the feedback now. But these are the three best options that we have right now. We didn't consider the status quo option until someone asked us to consider that in the feedback. And if someone has another option in the next set of feedback, we're willing to look at it, for sure.
And just on the second component, you're talking about the requirement for additional washrooms within the facility. So if you walk into a really old building, you might come across, for example, a set of stairs. And the stairs might be uneven, an unusual height, but it's okay because the building is grandfathered. It's grandfathered according to the year it was built. And so long as you're not making any major modifications to the building, you're not then triggering, as part of the development permit, a requirement to update the facilities.
Sorry, I apologize. We're not talking about being grandfathered, we're talking about our children and having adequate access to facilities. So it's great that it can be grandfathered in, and the province is going to force home for it, but that doesn't you're saying that it's not appropriate with modulars. Then why is it appropriate if we use up the music class and use up the library and use up the staff and use up all the other factors and increase students to that capacity? Why is that appropriate then?
So I think you're mixing two different issues though. So it's the city who grants development permits. They would require changes to the building. Should we be starting to make some other changes to the building, that would trigger and would lift the grandfathering and require us to make changes. As far as the changes in the learning spaces, we've already heard from the principal as to what that would mean to the learning environment. So two different things. One of them is required by law. One of them is more subjective, and it has to do with the quality of the learning environment.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, so to Slido. Do the teachers want to have scenario C? What is their opinion, especially the grade ones not having a breakout space in a few years? Kelly, can you speak to the staff perspective?
I would say scenario C is not their first choice. If that's what they need to do, that's what they'll do.
Do you have a question for the audience, Karen?
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Oh boy, I have really great sympathy for every teacher and person involved in the Altadore school. This is horrible. I have a great deal of sympathy for all of the families who have children in the school, who have children wanting to come into the school. To me, very simply, it seems to me that there are too many, there's very too many children, but too many children, not enough space. And somewhere, and this must be going on in many schools across Calgary, we're being let down. And somewhere, if I just knew the exact question to ask, we are being let down, and I think maybe we're being let down by the city. I do not think that the prefab idea should be so dismissed. We can't build a new school, we don't have the money to build a new school. So it is going to keep growing. Schools are going to max out. Richmond is going to max out. Altadore is maxed out. We still have families who are here now who want to go into Altadore. They're still building. Altadore, although it's an old neighborhood, it is being regenerated. So it's like a brand new neighborhood. So with Garrison Woods and Altadore, that's a huge area that I don't see any new schools being made. So why can't we be more creative and less rigid with this problem with the prefabs? For example, perhaps with your library, this school would like to use library. Could you not have a prefab for a library? Would the facilities, do you have to have a bathroom in a library? Could you use the prefabs for not necessarily per se proper classrooms, but for other auxiliary things that you do? Or even if you do have to have a prefab for classrooms for children, we're not going to get a new school anytime soon. We are growing. This gentleman over here is quite right. We're growing all the time. There's too many families needing these facilities that we pay taxes for and that we do expect for, that we choose to live in this neighborhood for. And it seems that it is confusing to me. Maybe I'm slow, but I don't see any reassurance that we have to just go through this for now because in 3 years, the city is going to address this, we're going to get a new school, or what, tooth fairy? And why can't we look at these prefabs more properly?
So I think we've answered the question on modular classrooms. I'm not sure that there's anything more that we can add to that. All I can say is, there is quite a bit of data and information that our planning team looks at in doing the projections. Do we have any guarantees that those numbers will be exactly as projected? No, but they do this for schools across our school district, and they're highly accurate. And so what it shows us at this point in time is that we have an issue that we're facing over the next few years, and then enrollment may drop after that time. We have no guarantees. It may not turn out exactly that way, but that's how it looks for us at this time. Slide over. Why does anything else trump the student's residence proximity to this school? So I'm assuming that's sort of speaking to the lottery and sort of how that might affect students who live close to the school. Is that kind of the question?
The School Act.
School Act?
Yeah.
What about the School Act?
So it's the next question on there.
Oh, the next one. The School Act is the law in our province. Why are we ignoring it? Section 13(3)(b).
So I believe the section you're referring to is the fact that students can have access to their designated community school. And you're probably putting that there in light of the fact that there are out of attendance area students. And so the legal interpretation of that is that once a student is in the school, that section does not apply. So it applies for new applicants, if you want, new enrollees to the school. And so any student within the catchment area, if today, amongst the list that Kelly has of enrolled kindergarten students for next school year, we happen to be in a scenario where there was some out of attendance students and you were in a lottery, at that point in time, we would not be able to admit anyone from out of attendance area if we weren't able to admit everybody within the attendance area first.
But what about current students who move out of here? Are they?
So current students that are within the school under any of the three scenarios, even if they move out, they're expected to ultimately relocate to their community school within wherever their new address
They
is.
don't have data addresses. So if you're gonna make some major change that affects all kinds of kids who are within the walk zone, who are part of both Garrison and Altadore, why not then address the families that, and I'm not talking about ones that were let in as part of just registration before, I'm talking about the ones that moved out of the area. Because we do have quite a few of those. I mean, I just registered my second kid, and I used a driver's license that's almost 5 years old. There's no way of being able to tell where I actually live.
So a couple of things. We do ask everyone on a yearly basis to update their address at the beginning of the year. We do currently have 6 students who are attending the school who have moved, who know that they will be able to finish the current school year at Altadore and who will not be able to attend Altadore school next year. There was also students last year who were in the same boat. So at the school, no, we do not go and do not monitor. With our new registrants, we do accept a driver's license, which may not be up to date, but our preferred proof of address is a current bill with, or a tax receipt or something like that from the government that has the current address on it.
I mean, I offered that, and they said, no, we don't need it, it's just a driver's license. So I just say that because I know it is an issue in school. I've heard her kid at the school.
We also know you.
Yeah, yeah.
So just before I go to Carrie for the next question, we have just a few more minutes left for our Q&A and for our session here tonight. So we'll take the questions that we can in that time. And if there are ones that are remaining that are frequently asked that a lot of people need answers to, then we'll do what we can to provide answers to you through, we'll update the FAQ document following this meeting. Carrie?
Thanks, Karen.
I gathered earlier that it's going to be 2 final decision makers, and I gathered earlier that there will be 2 final decision makers. Is it possible for those folks to share what of options A, B, and C, which side are they leaning towards? It allows us parents perhaps to handle it better over the next few months.
So I think I mean, they can speak to it, but I think really we need to see the feedback from everybody before we can say which scenario might be best.
Given the current plans and given the current information that you folks have, you must be somewhat one way or the other. You really need to do.
So as a decision maker, I think what you hear here tonight is for every one person that leans one way, the next person beside them might lean another way. Case in point, we said we would extend the deadline to April 30th. Somebody said make it sooner. So somebody says to us the lottery is not a good option. The next person says the lottery is a good option. So we have no preconceived notions about which way this decision will go. If we did, we wouldn't be out here consulting with you. We would have made a decision already. But as Karen mentioned earlier, in terms of dialogue, we want to involve citizens in the decisions that affect them to the degree that we can. So we have no way of knowing right now
based on survey data, based on a survey that's out there with a new scenario in there, of knowing which way the decision will go based on the feedback we get. Jeff, I'm speaking on your behalf. Did you want to add anything?
That's what I see as strength, because those of us, gather information around what we're going to, that's what directions that you have.
It's not unusual in the sense that we have to listen to the folks who are in this room. We also have to honor the voices that are not here this evening. And we don't know if each one of them holds the same view that you do. And so we want to make sure that we go through the process thoroughly and transparently and then make the decision that way.
I'll just say I'm happy with the 3 scenarios that we are considering and seeking feedback on. Allow all the students who are currently enrolled in Altadore School to remain in Altadore School. So that is my first good feeling about this, but as Carrie said, for every family, there's a different opinion about the best way to address this. Carrie and I will get the feedback from all the people here and other people as well. It will be what is best for the students at Altadore School and what is best for the students who will not be able to stay at Altadore School, and that's the way it goes, but it will be based on what is best for the students. That will be the criteria to carry me.
Thanks, Jeff. So I think we'll do one more slider question and one more from the audience, and then we need to wrap up. So how large will class sizes be under scenario C? I'm not sure we can give a definitive answer for this, but.
So class size is determined on the funding that we receive from the government, and it's on a per student basis. So class sizes per se, student-teacher ratio does not change under scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. What could change is the number of classes within a particular classroom or a teaching space. But regardless of what we do, that funding comes, and we're very committed to taking as much of that funding that we get for each student that we get and putting it as much as possible towards teachers and staff.
Okay, last question right here.
I actually have a couple questions in there with regards to scenarios A and B. Scenario A is about the vote, and it seems like the priority list and the voting situation is fairly well established. I'm wondering, as an option, if there's an alternative to that voting situation. Perhaps everyone who's in the close proximity would be put into another priority set, and then there would be a lottery for everyone who's beyond that boundary, perhaps, and that would be an alternative lottery solution, possibly. Also, with regards to scenario B, the boundary change, I would love some clarification on a picture. It'd be great if you could get an image up there of what the boundary change is. I've heard 3 different things, and I actually have the pictures from the other Altadore meeting, and I can't remember which one's which, and the red line is different on the 2 pictures, so I'm not sure where the boundary is. Is it at 20th Street in Flanders? Is it at Garrison Boulevard and somewhere in there? Or where exactly is it? What would be cut out? And how did you decide on that line? And is that line flexible? And maybe the walk zone should be completely sort of redesigned to have a crawl zone, walk zone, and that other boundary. Because I think a lot of people who are across the street are upset. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm on the outside looking in. I'm on Cambrai Avenue. I'm literally one house away from 20th Street, so I'm wondering, am I one house off the boundary? Am I inside or outside the boundary? Is that boundary static? How are we deciding on that boundary? Who's figured out where that boundary should be? What are the numbers for the houses? Do you have kids' addresses, and that's how you establish the boundary? How is that figured out? What can we do there?
Are those options
Okay, thanks. I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Connor to see some more attention to all those details. But your first question about the lottery process, what I would say is we went through quite an extensive process to establish common lottery rules that apply in all situations. So the likelihood that we would change that or make an exception is probably not likely. Because in the past, before we had that, we did have different schools did different things. Some prioritized siblings, some prioritized walk zones, some prioritized If you had more than one sibling, you had more weight than someone that just had one sibling, and what we had found is that that created a bunch of confusion for our families, and people didn't really understand how those rules were applied, so we did create, probably back in about 2014, this standardized lottery.
Can you give me some priorities one more time, just to clarify for everybody?
Yeah, so the first priority, the first group is students new students coming who have a sibling already in the building and are within the walk zone of the school. Then within priority 2, we actually have 2 groups, and that speaks to the fact that it was very difficult, and it still remains difficult, to prioritize siblings over walk zone. So both of those are kind of lumped into category 2, and they are given equal weight if the lottery is actually pulled up that category. So equal weight is given to someone who may be outside the walk zone, but already has a sibling in the school. And at the same time, there are people within the walk zone that don't have a sibling in the school. And then the third category is the category where you don't have a sibling in the school and you're outside the walk zone.
So the walk zone for Altadore is 20th Street?
Connor will speak to that when he brings up the map. I think he's got, we can't bring up the map, so hopefully he has better eyes than me and he can see it on his little print. If not, we can definitely answer that in the FAQ.
Is the lottery just going to be for the incoming kindergarten class, or is it now going to be applied?
So it would be for incoming kindergarten or anybody new who at any other grade that wants to come into the building where the enrollment in that grade in that scenario is already over 50. So if somebody completely new moved in, say to be in grade 2 next year, because we've heard and we know that there's over 60 kids already in grade 1, likely going to be 60 students in grade 2 next year. If the decision was for option A, scenario A, if there were new people that moved in and they wanted their child to be in grade 2 next year, more than likely they would be going to Richmond School unless for some reason 15 or 16 of those kids actually leave for grade 2 next year, which is probably unlikely. So the goal under the lottery would be to get every grade close to that 50, but again, without asking any students who are already in the building to leave the building. And just one other thing to kind of wrap up, because I am the manager of the planning department, and so I just want people to know that we do think about this a lot. I know it seems like we're not very creative in our solutions, but we are limited and we don't really have a lot of solutions. Like for every other community in the city, if schools are too full, the primary ways that the situation is solved is either through a lottery process to an overflow location or through a boundary change. In fact, we just went through a project this year in the community of Town Around the Hills, which has 2 elementary schools and a middle school, just opened the second elementary only 2 years ago, drew the boundary where we thought made sense would be the best boundary. One of the schools ended up being more full, one of the elementaries than the other ended up having a lot more space, and we had to change the boundary, and we did a very similar thing to what's happening here. We let students who were already in the building remain, and new students in that new boundary would go to the other school. And the whole overall size of that community is about 25,000 people. So we're not here to pick on the Altadore community. We have done our best thinking about what within our space, resources, and what is possible for us. What are 3 scenarios that give people a variety of impacts to assess as they think about what those solutions could mean. And so I do want you to know that we're constantly monitoring. We went back after the first meeting and we re-looked and there are a lot of options for students in our system. We have a lot of alternative programs. So could the number of students in Altadore, there are a lot of young students living here, but a lot of them make other choices as well. And I think I said that at the first meeting. If that radically shifts, our projections are probably way off one way or the other. Whether more people take alternative programs or less could have an impact on our projections. But all we can really do is look at what we know is coming up through the preschool census, which has proven to be fairly reliable for us in all communities, as well as what the historic attendance patterns are. And so it is our best thinking that this is, we do see that trending down in the preschool census. We've noticed it the last 2 or 3 years. Our kindergarten numbers in our system are lower than they have been. They were steadily increasing for the last 10 years until the last couple of years they've gone down again. So anyways, I just wanted to wrap it up that way.
So I think you're looking at this map in the presentation. Yeah, so I think what you're potentially looking at is both the walk zone and the new proposed boundary. So I know we can't get it up on the slide, I'm sorry about that tonight, but if you remember, if you were at the previous presentation and you can see it online, there is a map here that shows a little yellow square, that's the new boundary. So that runs along Flanders, just north of the houses through the park, and then up 20th at the, kind of cuts up right there, right ice up there, straight up to the 33rd. Now the red line looking at the map is the existing walk zone, and that comes in Flanders, goes up Garrison Boulevard, and then I can't quite read my map from here, but it cuts in through the alley, I believe, behind the houses there, and that's the extent of the walk zone.
So there's that overlap where the yellow square is gonna go to Richmond, but there's the red line that's also part of the love. Where?
No, the goal of the map was to show the new boundary and compare it to the existing walk zone. So it's got two separate distinct pieces of information on it. So you have the walk zone drawn, and that as it relates to the lottery, and then you have the yellow new pre-designated zone, which applies to scenario B. So it may not have been captured very well in terms of the legend in there, but that was the intent.
Thanks, Connor. So just want to thank you all for attending tonight. I know these are difficult conversations to have, but we encourage you to share your feedback with us through the online survey, which will be available in a couple days. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
The question is a controversial one. If it is a lottery, when would that take place roughly?
If you want to make the decision by April 3rd,
Yeah.
it would probably take place probably the week after.
Oh, okay. So
we already know what
awesome.
the numbers are.
And then the decision will be shared through the website?
Yes.
Would that be the main?
Yeah, so that's your best place to go. There's probably also something on the main city website, but your school website is the best.
Lovely. Thank you.
So what we do instead
We still have
based on unfortunately, you're further away, and so that is how we use
Thank you. When I see my
but you're still wanting to again, they are and other team, I don't know what you're at, I don't have my information. A lot.
But usually, it's such a one of it, and obviously we're all exactly the same. We can see it, they're all being torn down and there's and they all
We don't know what the future is because we delay the
they have to bring an infrastructure. And the city's letting them increase that, make it a long-term solution. Like a long-term solution, that this act. Even though that have that right now, and you're getting I have to just talk to
Yeah, it's one of those things where like there's the appendicitis, then eruption, and then you got
out of bounds. Why are they cramped?
Yeah, and so 2 months.
Why don't they change their tune? Why don't they say, okay, you're out of bounds, we are bring right now. But here's what's gonna happen there. If we're poor and you're the first one out, you make your choice. But then you decide, you can either come here or you go, oh wait, I want to do that, I'm gonna go to that school.
I'm paying. The workplace has to be the weekend. It's right now, it's just, no, I think they're guaranteed.
Of course, now it's,
So then that's,
we already have confirmation of whether or not you won't be allowed stuff. Under some of these scenarios, you're gonna be welcome. Your child is welcome. You're in the scenario. And
but then there's a house. So she would, maybe, she may end, so I think they're done at 2:30, or starts at 3. But then if she doesn't,